I always like to be there in person if I can, because you're very engaging as a group, and but unfortunately could not make it today. I hope that at the end of the presentation, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Are you just going to talk with him?
No.
You're done now.
Oh, I hope you can hear me.
Please continue, Dino.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so again, at the end of my presentation, I'm happy to take any questions, and if I don't get to your questions, feel free to send your questions to the moderators, and I'd be happy to respond via email if possible. So I'm excited to kick off the session with my presentation on modernization of Division 24 and 25 of the Food and Drug Regulations, really to get into our approach on regulating foods for special dietary use and infant foods. And I'm sure you're aware of the proposal that we put forward, but I just wanted to start with just an overview or an outline of my presentation. So first part of my presentation will focus on giving you an overview of the current regulatory framework and some of the challenges we're seeing with the framework, and then I'll move into a summary of the proposed regulatory framework, modernization framework that we put forward last year. And then I'll walk you through some of the key proposals, and then finally some information on the consultation that was launched last November. The second part of my presentation, I'll focus more on the proposed compositional requirements. And this portion of the presentation will provide more information on the ongoing compositional requirement consultation that we launched just this October. And I'll give you a high-level summary of that consultation. And then lastly, I'll provide an overview of the next steps for this regulatory modernization initiative. So I thought I would start first with setting the stage with some of the context of the current regulatory framework. So as you're probably aware, Division 24 regulates food for special dietary use. And these are products intended for individuals of ages 1 or more. And those foods are specially processed or formulated to meet a particular nutrient requirement of an individual.
Dino, I'm sorry. Can I interrupt you? Can you just hold on
Sure.
a minute? We've lost the video feed in the room for some reason.
Sure.
I'll be right with you. Okay, you can continue now.
Okay, so maybe I'll start over on this slide. So this slide will provide an overview of some of the products that are captured under Division 24 and 25. So as you're probably aware, Division 24 regulates foods for special dietary use, and those are products intended for individuals of ages 1 or more. And FSDUs are foods specially processed or formulated to meet a particular nutrient requirement of an individual with a physical or physiological condition, or to impart a particular effect through a controlled intake, such as weight loss. And Division 24 is characterized by a closed list of products, or product categories, I should say. And you can see on the screen, I've provided that closed list. So it's gluten-free foods, foods for protein-restricted or low amino acid diets. Some examples of that are pasta or biscuits that are limited to 1 or more amino acids. Formulated liquid diets, such as formulas used as a sole source of nutrition for dietary management of health conditions such as chronic kidney disease. We have also foods for very low energy diets, a diet of less than 900 calories per day. We have meal replacements, nutritional supplements, and foods for use in weight reduction diets. And Division 25, you'll see the products at the bottom of the slide. Those are foods that are labeled or advertised for consumption by infants. So those are less than 1 year of age. And that includes infant formula, human milk fortifiers, and other foods such as infant cereal and infant purees. So in terms of the modernization initiative, we're proposing a comprehensive approach to modernizing Division 24 and 25. We know that the current regulations were developed before my time, I would say, the 1970s. So for those of you who remember 8-track audio, technology back in the 70s. That's when these regulations were first promulgated. And they didn't envision the type of, or the change in dietary patterns in Canadians back then. So to say they're outdated and flexible is very accurate, and probably understates the need for modernization. And they really hinder scientific advancements and updates to recommended intake. So, for example, it limits the availability of critical nutrition products approved in other countries. It leaves Canada more vulnerable to shortages, which we saw in 2013 or 2022, and poses challenges for industry innovation. So what are we proposing? So as you noticed, or as you're aware, last year we launched a consultation and we proposed a restructuring of Division 24 and 25, which currently differentiates products based on the age of intended consumer. And what we proposed was two sections, one for foods for special dietary purpose, and I'll explain a bit more about that term, and another for other foods. So the aim of the restructuring of these divisions is to redefine product categories and establish requirements based on the risk profile of the product and the vulnerability of the intended subpopulation versus the age of the consumer. So in the proposed modernized framework, the term FSDU would be removed and the term Foods for Special Dietary Purpose, FSDP, would be used instead. And that's because we'd like to align with the addition of that term in 2019 to the Food and Drugs Act, and also would eliminate the confusion regarding the overlapping terms. FSDP would be defined as foods that are specifically processed or formulated to meet a particular requirement of an individual in whom there's a physical or physiological condition exists as a result of a disease, disorder, or abnormal physical state, or to be the sole or primary source of nutrition for an individual. So the definitions are very similar in terms of FSDP and FSDU. So we are now proposing to align with the term FSDP. The proposed section for FSDP would encompass higher risk products, so those intended for vulnerable subpopulations. And the categories that would fall within this section are shown on the top left hand side of the slide. So we have infant formula, we have prepackaged human milk, and we have medical foods, and also we have some of the conditions for medical foods. So for infants, including human milk fortifiers for ages 1 or more, and also for total diet replacements for rate reduction. Products currently regulated under Division 24 and 25 that do not fall under the FSDP section will be placed in a separate section. And these are foods that are intended for self-selections by consumers. So the categories would fall within the sections are shown in the bottom on the bottom of the slide. So you'll see gluten-free foods, conventional infant foods, formulated nutritional foods, and foods for use in weight reduction diets. So some of the key proposals we have 3 key proposals that I'd like to share with you today. So the first one is enhanced regulatory oversight for FSDP. So the proposed section for FSDP would require enhanced regulatory oversight because they're intended for a more vulnerable subpopulation. And that would include, for example, shortage provisions. So proposing to help mitigate the risk of shortages, we would provide the department with enhanced capabilities to assess and address shortages of FSDP effectively. So that would include provisions that would require manufacturers of FSDP to report shortages or anticipated shortages to Health Canada. And in addition, the minister would have the authority to request specific information to assess or respond to an FSDP shortage. The provisions also include the exceptional importation framework, which is helping to ensure access to FSDP in shortages situation. So we would allow the exceptional importation and sale of products that do not fully meet the Canadian regulatory requirements, but are manufactured in other countries of comparable quality standards. So if you're aware of the shortage situation that we had a few years ago, we created an interim policy that had the exceptional importation policy. But instead of having this interim policy, we would have actual regulatory provisions that would allow for that to be put in place. We would also have stop sale requirements. So we're proposing that we that some of the stop sale provisions that are currently applicable to some of the FSDU categories, such as formulated liquid diets and infant formula, be extended to all FSDP categories. So this would empower the minister to request written evidence from the manufacturers regarding their products and to temporarily halt their sale until the requested evidence is provided. So if the evidence is deemed insufficient, there could be a product suspension of sale. And finally, we're proposing a pre-market authorization model for most infant products, noting that the pre-market requirements would vary depending on the category of the infant FSDP. So during that proposal, or consultation, we received a lot of stakeholder feedback on the proposal. Now, the idea of the model was to formalize a process that's currently informal in terms of a notification process. So right now, currently, manufacturers notify Health Canada and then they wait for a letter of no further questions before they market their product. So the idea there was to just formalize that process. We heard a lot of feedback from from stakeholders, I should say. So we're currently working on refining that policy. The second key policy objective was improved product labeling. So for FSDPs, the policy proposal includes labeling requirements with detailed product information for safe use, as well as the differentiation from foods that are not FSDP. So for products that are not FSDPs, the proposal would aim to align the labeling of these foods with existing conventional prepackaged food requirements. So for example, the nutrition facts table, front of pack nutrition labeling, and list of ingredients. And lastly, we're proposing updated compositional requirements. So during the first consultation, we mentioned that we would have updated compositional requirements based on the latest evidence of dietary reference intakes, but very little details were provided at that time. And I'll talk about the details of that consultation in the second part of my presentation. So this slide just shows you an overview of the first consultation we launched in November, on November 28th of 2023, on the modernization of FSDPs and FSDUs and infant foods. And this consultation was open for a period of 90 days. And you'll see that we received significant feedback. 83 stakeholders submitted feedback. The graph summarizes the number of stakeholders by group for which we received the feedback on one or more aspects of the proposal. So as you can see, most of the comments received were from health professionals, health professional associations, and non-governmental organizations. And we also received many comments from industry and industry associations, as well as various representatives from municipal, provincial, or territorial governments. So now moving on to the second part of my presentation. So to help inform the comprehensive Canada Gazette Part 1 proposal, we launched a second consultation to solicit feedback regarding the compositional requirements for infant foods and for foods for special dietary use. Therefore, on October of 23rd of this past year, I would say just over a month ago, we launched a second consultation. And the foods that are captured within the scope of that consultation are those where compositional requirements were proposed to be set out in the FDR. So these include infant formula, medical foods for ages 1 or more, medical foods represented as a total diet replacement for weight reduction, conventional infant foods, so infant cereals, fruit purees, gluten-free foods, and formulated nutritional foods. That is foods that are currently regulated as meal replacements and nutritional supplements, including meal replacements represented for use in weight reduction diets. So foods that are not captured are not within scope of the consultation include prepackaged human milk, since those requirements would not be proposed given the natural variation in composition of human milk and a difficulty of meeting that particular set of standards. And then the second category would be medical foods for infants. Those are, although we want to permit their fortification, those are really specific for medical conditions. Therefore, we're proposing a pre-market authorization for all medical foods for infants, except for non-fortified products like modulars and thickeners. And by requiring pre-market authorization, the goal is to establish appropriate safeguards and ensure that the safe production of those medical foods that meet that specific dietary need for that vulnerable infant. So some of the primary guiding principles underpinning the proposed composition requirements was to ensure that foods within the scope of the proposal are safe and nutritionally adequate, which aligns with the objectives of our food fortification policy. While also ensuring safety and nutritional adequacy was achieved by anchoring that proposal in the most recent scientific evidence on recommended dietary intakes. So in most cases, we relied on dietary reference intakes, DRIs, established by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, so NASEM. We also wanted to increase alignment with other like-minded regulatory authorities and improving access, where were also very important guiding principles, particularly for infant formulas, which are more vulnerable to shortages. Where there were discrepancies between international regulators and the latest scientific data, we always prioritize the latest scientific data, acknowledging that some jurisdictions undertake updates on their own, based on their own timelines and regulations, and some countries are lagging behind the most recent scientific evidence. So we ensured that we always use that latest scientific data. For each product category, the proposed compositional requirements varied and could include energy, so calories, macronutrient amounts, so protein, fat, carbohydrates, and also micronutrient amounts, which are vitamins and minerals. The regulations are designed to help ensure future revisions to compositional requirements could be implemented in a timely manner in response to new science. So to achieve this, we're proposing that the updated requirements be incorporated by reference into the Food and Drug Regulations. For those of you who are not familiar with IBR, those are documents that are posted on our website that could be amended administratively following, of course, stakeholder consultation without having to go through the Governor and Council regulatory process. So this process has been around for many, many years now. Essentially, anytime we would want to make a change to the minimum or maximum values, we would put out a notice of proposal on our website, and usually it's a 60, 75-day consultation period. Once we hear from stakeholders, we'll analyze the comments and then move forward with our final proposal, which would be our notice of modification. So that process usually takes between 3 to 6 months, depending on how urgent the issue is, versus regulations that could take many, many, many years. So that's a really timely way of making future changes, and that's the process we're going to use moving forward for these compositional requirements. So on the next two slides, I'll provide a very brief overview of the compositional requirements proposal by product category. I'll just say that if you want more information on the minimum maximum levels, there are many categories, and I didn't want to go through that during my presentation today, but I welcome you to consult the consultation that's currently underway, and you can go on our website and definitely look at the requirements and the different proposals, and if you have any questions, you can follow up. But I just wanted to start off with a really brief overview of infant formula. So for the infant formula category, we're proposing more of a comprehensive and including minimum and maximum amounts for energy, macronutrients, and micronutrients. The requirements would be largely based on Codex standards, which are globally recognized standards that considered the compositional of human milk in their development. So just of note, the proposed compositional requirements do not take into account the specific needs of preterm infants and or infants with a specific medical condition. However, in our first pre-consultation, we proposed that an exemption from meeting compositional requirements could be permitted when medically justified. So to mitigate that potential risk and ensure clarity, it's proposed that products with an exemption be required to include additional product labeling. So, for example, a product formulated for individuals with PKU would state that it's free of essential amino acid phenylalanine for infants with phenylketonuria. For medical foods for ages 1 or more, represented as nutritionally complete, they're consumed as sole or primary source of nutrition. Therefore, they must contain all macro and micronutrients within an acceptable range to ensure that they meet an individual's requirements without posing a risk of excess intake. For medical foods that are not represented as nutritionally complete, are usually consumed alongside other foods in the diet, which reduces the risk of inadequate intake. So therefore, for those, we're proposing voluntary nutrient addition. However, since there may still be a risk of excess nutrient intakes, if those nutritionally incomplete foods are fortified with high levels of nutrients, maximum requirements are proposed for those micronutrients with the potential for serious irreversible adverse effects. So, for example, we're proposing maximum amounts for vitamin A, D, and E. For the proposed compositional requirements for medical foods prioritized, for the proposed compositional requirements for medical foods, prioritizing patient health and safety through alignment with the latest dietary intake recommendations was recommended. However, since these values were developed for the general population, they may not be appropriate for those with the medical condition. So to address that, we've proposed exempting from meeting those compositional requirements for medical foods in cases where it's medically justified to ensure that their formulations can meet the specific dietary requirements of those individuals with medical conditions. And to mitigate potential risk and ensure clarity, we're also proposing that these products require additional labeling requirements as well. So, for example, for those individuals that have chronic kidney diseases, we would the labeling would state formulated with lower protein, phosphorus, and potassium for people with chronic kidney disease. And the last category on that slide is medical food represented as a total diet replacement for weight reduction. So for that category, just to go back to the first consultation we did, a distinct subcategory of medical foods was proposed to address specific needs of individuals aged 17 years or more seeking medically supervised weight reduction through total diet replacement. So recognizing their unique purpose and greater risks associated with their use, we propose that the total diet replacements for weight reduction be subject to distinct compositional requirements from which they would not be able to deviate. So the current proposal sets out requirements for energy, macronutrient, and micronutrient content, and the proposed amounts are based on the latest scientific evidence and recommended daily dietary intakes, and they aim to preserve the lean body mass and maintain normal metabolic processes when there's a caloric deficit. So this slide shows an overview of the proposed compositional requirements for foods that are not FSDPs. So the first category is conventional infant foods. So the proposal sets out updated sodium restrictions for all foods that and new sugar restrictions for certain infant foods. So sugar, as you're aware, sugars and sodium are nutrients of public health concern in Canada, and the WHO recommends that foods high in sugar and salt should not be consumed by infants and young children. So to help mitigate that risk, we are proposing to introduce a restriction on sugars in certain categories of conventional infant foods that contain sugar-based ingredients. So for example, desserts, beverages, and snacks such as rusks and puffs. For sodium, the regulations currently prohibit the addition of salt in certain infant foods for a closed list of products. And the proposal maintains the current salt prohibitions under the FDR, but we're proposing to remove the closed list of food products that limit with sodium limits to ensure that all types of conventional infant foods not prohibited from containing added salts have sodium limits. So we would have one category of products that would be that would be prohibited from having salt at all. And then we would have another list of infant foods that would have sodium limits. So next, we're proposing updates to the fortification requirements for infant cereals specifically. So the proposed vitamin and mineral amounts were developed with the principles of our food fortification in mind. So therefore, some nutrients, the amounts are aimed at public health protection, such as reducing the risk of nutrient deficiency, while for other nutrients, they help to ensure nutrient restoration. Since, for example, for cereal grain, there are losses of nutrients during processing. So two highlights of the infant cereal fortification proposal are first mandating iron addition and then permitting the addition of vitamin D. So although most infant cereals sold in Canada already contain added iron, we're proposing mandatory addition given the importance of infant cereal as an iron source in infant diets. And for vitamin D, we're proposing that its addition be permitted, so it'd be voluntary, to help reduce the risk of inadequate intakes and promote adequate bone health. And the proposal to permit vitamin D addition also aligns with other jurisdictions such as the US and the EU. Second category of foods that are not FSDPs are gluten-free foods. And we know that people with celiac disease rely heavily on gluten-free foods as substitute foods in their diet. However, following such a diet increases the risks of nutrient deficiencies, especially for certain vitamins and mineral nutrients that are required to be added to white flour, for example. So under the FDR, gluten-free foods are currently regulated as foods for special dietary use if they contain any added vitamins and minerals, and they're also subject to advertising restrictions. So we heard from stakeholders that these advertising restrictions are a disincentive to add vitamins and mineral nutrients. So under the proposed framework, gluten-free foods would no longer be considered FSDUs and would be regulated under the general food framework. We're proposing to remove the current advertising restrictions for fortified gluten-free foods so that we can promote awareness and accessibility to these foods. Our food policy proposal or policy supports the fortification of substitute foods to ensure nutritional equivalency of the foods being replaced. So under the current proposal, we have identified two categories of foods that can be fortified. So the first category is gluten-free flours, and the second category are gluten-free foods made with gluten-free flour. So for example, baking mixes and bread. The proposal also identifies the specific nutrients and amounts that may be added to gluten-free foods. And those nutrients and amounts ensure that the gluten-free food would provide an equivalent amount of nutrients as its gluten-containing counterpart. So the equivalency proposal or policy would be in place. And the final category of foods are formulated nutritional foods. And those are intended to be consumed in addition to a diet that may be inadequate in energy or essential nutrients. So for products represented for those 14 years and older, formulated nutritional foods may also be represented as a replacement for one or more daily meals, but not all daily meals. So under that proposal, under that category, the proposal, we're setting out energy, macronutrients, and micronutrient requirements. So the proposal would be based on the latest scientific data on recommended intakes and the principles of our food fortification policy as it relates to nutritional adequacy and safety. And since the dietary intake recommendations differ significantly based on age, we set out three unique criteria. One for 1 to 3 years, another one for 4 to 13 years, and then finally one for 14 years and older. For products that are intended for 14 years and older, we also have three different sets of requirements that we proposed. These requirements are based on caloric content of the product or whether the product is represented as a meal replacement. So for products that provide more than 350 calories and or for those represented as a meal replacement, we're proposing higher micronutrient levels since these foods would likely be substituting a larger portion of the diet than those lower calorie containing products or products not represented as a meal replacement. So we're nearing the end of the presentation. Before I turn to you for questions, I just wanted to provide you with an overview of the next steps for our modernization initiative. So in gray, you'll see I've highlighted the most recent steps. The first being the online consultation that we moved forward with last year, November of 2023. The second being the online public consultation that we proposed recently in October. And then just wanted to highlight that consultation was extended, and it is now, the period is open until January 22nd, 2025. So we welcome, if you want to take a look at the consultation and submit feedback, we welcome comments right up until January 22nd of next year. And once that consultation period closes, we will compile and analyze stakeholder feedback from both consultations, and we'll revise the policy accordingly. And that will lead into the drafting of the regulations, which would be developed and published in Canada Gazette Part 1 for feedback in the spring of 2026. And also comments received from that consultation will be taken into consideration and as we draft the final regulations. And then finally, the regulations would be published once we finalize them in Canada Gazette Part 2 and would typically come into force on the day or days set out in the regulations. And the timeline for that publication is currently unknown. So with that, I'll turn it back to you for any questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Mr. Covone, for this great presentation. For the people on the virtual audience and here, we have mics in the room, so if you want to make have any questions, please feel free. They're in the back of the room, or you can raise your hand and we can come to you. So we open now for the floor for questions. Any questions? Do we have any question online? I can see that. No. Okay. Oh, there is a question. Okay.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and hi, Mr. Dino. I just like to know what is going to introduce into because AI is coming into the food safety and regulation and everything, and what sort of regulatory aspects have been drafted or planning to draft regarding food safety and AI kind of controls. Because everything going to be AI, and it can be good, it can be bad. So that's why I'm asking.
That's a great question that I can't answer because food safety is another group within the Bureau of Microbial Hazards that they look at food safety. But I could tell you that we're definitely looking at different aspects of AI in the work that we do every day. So we're definitely learning. It's a new area, a new field, and I really do feel that. As we modernize and we're looking at different technologies, it's definitely a consideration, but unfortunately I can't speak to the food safety aspects of AI.
Thank you. Do we have any other question? I can't see anything from here. Sorry, the light is very bright on my eyes, so I can see if you raise your hand, but we have the mic guys over there. I think we have one more. I see the mic guy running. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Covone, for the presentation. Just have one question with regards to formulated nutritional foods. How would that be distinguished from supplemented foods?
Yeah, that's a good question. So supplemented foods are really a closed category of products that are not considered foods for special dietary use. So, the regulations on supplemented foods have specific categories and maximum levels and minimal levels for each vitamin and mineral that you're allowed to add to those products. So it's a very specific closed list of categories, like for example, beverages and bars, and so it's very specific. Whereas the definition of a foods for special dietary use is purpose in the case of our proposed modernization is very specific to, it's imparting, it's for use of in a particular physical condition of a consumer. So to address a physical condition of a consumer. So it's very specific, and if you meet the definition of a foods for special dietary purpose, then you would be under the framework that I'm speaking to today. So they're two different distinct products, and it really boils down to the definitions and where they would fit under the definitions. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's really hard to answer without having a specific product in mind. But I would say if you do have a product in mind and you want to know where it fits, you can definitely send us an email and we can help you with that.
Thank you. We have time. We have only like a minute and a half left. So if one last question in the audience. Oh, here we have one. It's coming, it's running. He's getting his steps this morning.
Thank you for the information. I just got one question. Thank you for the information. Just got one question. For conventional food, making a gluten-free claim, it's not going to fall into this category, right?
Gluten-free foods would now be considered conventional foods.
Okay. But if
In the sense that they would be considered non-foods for special dietary purpose foods, but they would still have requirements for, vitamins and mineral addition, and so they would still have different requirements that are not, like for instance, conventional foods. If you follow the fortification policy, then you can just go ahead and do that. But for gluten-free foods, it would be specific to the requirements that we set out in our proposal. But they're not regulated as medical foods, for example.
So as long as once you make a gluten-free claim, you will follow that requirement for those vitamin minerals.
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you're looking at flour, for gluten-free flour, then you would follow the vitamins and minerals that would be allowed for, for example, white flour, because we want to make sure that they're nutritionally equivalent. So those two would be, for someone who's consuming a gluten-free flour, they would be getting the same vitamins and minerals as someone who's consuming a white flour. So that's the principle of fortification. So they would have requirements, for example, nutrition facts table, and they would continue to have those requirements, but they would be regulated under our framework that I'm proposing today.
Okay, let's give Mr. Covone a great round of applause. Thank you very much for your
Thank you very
presentation.
much.
Very helpful. And we will talk soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.